Hello, my name is Rob and welcome to Swift Slots. And welcome back to part 2 of my Tamiya 1/24th scale Lancia Stratos Group 5 build. So in part 1, I took the whole back end and turned it into a slot car, adding the axle, the gears and the motor and a bit of sound deadening. And in this part 2, I should be turning my attentions to the front end, getting all the front steering in, the guide, painting the wheels, fitting the PU rubber tyres and turning this standard 1/24th scale plastic kit into a fully working slot car chassis. So less of the talk, let's get to the bench. Okay, so we got to tackle the front end now. Now there's probably 100 different ways to do this, but the way that I've decided to do it is I'm going to take this piece of brass strip that I found that's 1mm thick, and I'm going to lay it across the top of that top strap there, and then there's a slight joggle in this chassis just here of about 2mm thick, and this piece of brass is 2mm thick as well. So I'm going to lay that piece of brass in there and I shall solder it to the bottom of this strapping, and that will take up the difference. Then what I shall do is lay a piece of strapping across the bottom as well, and then this piece of detail here, which used to go or should go on the bottom there, which would be a shame to lose that detail, will be overlaid onto the top of this brass. There's a little shoulder across the bottom there which I'll have to remove, but that's fine. That will glue on there. That will give me my detail back, and I can always profile the ends if necessary. Obviously the holes will be drilled in this strapping as well, so that it has the pivot points in the correct place. So you'll end up with a piece of brass on the top, a piece of brass on the bottom, and then this piece of detail will simply be overlaid purely for detail reasons, just to give a bit more interest on the bottom. Then what I shall do is I shall take these steel rivets and I shall drill a hole all the way through, and I shall steel rivet the whole lot together so it's all nice as one. Now before I rivet it together, I'm obviously going to have to make the steering knuckles. So here are the steering knuckles as came with the kit. So what I should do is I should make those out of this piece of 6mm brass here. So they're basically just squares with the relevant holes drilled in them. So let's crack on and get all this front end in, and then we can move on to the guide. Okay, so that's the two brass front arms all in, and you can see the original plastic detail here of the kit. The tops of the two steel pins run through the detail, through the lower arm, through the chassis itself, up through the thickening plate, up through the top plate, and they terminate here at the top with about 1.5 mm to spare, all ready for pining over when I finally get ready to pin it all together. You can also see the two steel pins here running through the exact original positions of the original kit, so they all register down in the lower plate as well, and they all line up perfectly with the bottom of the original plate as well. So everything is exactly where it was in the original kit. And also the front wheel is free to clear as well, although if it didn't we could always tickle it into place to make it clear, but it all clears really well. So that's the front end done in terms of the arms. Now I've got to turn my attentions to making these knuckles in brass so they can now fit in that little recess in there. Right, let's do that. Okay, so after a little bit of faffing around, fine-tuning and polishing, we now have something that looks dangerously like steering. So if we pop a wheel in the hub, we can see that it's got a half-decent lock as well. So the reason why I ended up having to silver solder the whole thing together was because the pins that I've used are actually steel, and the trouble with steel is it gains a scale as you heat it up. And with the normal soft solder flux being so thin, that flux burns off really quickly before this brass gets a chance to heat right up, especially with the blowtorch, because the soldering iron won't really touch this great big brass block. So I had to use silver solder because the flux is more like a resin, and it sits around the work and resists all the heat, so it remains as a fluxing agent even when the metal is ridiculously hot. And that's the only thing I could have used to make sure that the solder flowed all the way down through the pin, because when you drill this hole through the brass, it actually intersects the pin and cuts it in half almost effectively. So you do need to have the pin soldered top and bottom and not just pressed in, because as soon as you put this hole in the middle of the knuckle here, it actually makes the brass pin, the pivot pin, the metal pivot pin very weak, because you're chopping it in half. So by silver soldering it, you get all the strength and none of the downsides, apart from having to silver solder it, which is a bit of a faff. It also makes a little bit of a mess. You've got to clean it all up and all the rest of it. But it's all done now, so we can actually see all the pins and all the pivots all working all perfectly well there. No problems whatsoever. It's all clear and it's all nice and free to move. Right, so with the steering now in, we can now turn our attentions to the guide. So now the hole is drilled to 3.5mm, I can now use my little special tapered reaming tool to ream out the 3.5mm hole to a tapered 3.6mm to take this Slotting Plus guide. So let's use the tool for the first time. Okay, so I drilled out my hole to 3.5mm. I then honed half of the hole with my honing tool just so that I could get the guide in. Then I could work out then exactly how much material to take away to clear the wires and all the rest of it. Now I've actually got to that stage where I can actually get the guide in the hole and turning, albeit tight, and all that's got cutting out is done, ready to clear for the wires. I can now put my honing tool back in the hole, and I can just very gently, a little bit at a time, just keep going in there and honing out the hole until the guide fits absolutely perfectly in its correct position. So I'm just going to go just a little bit more, a little tiny bit deeper each time, and then try the guide as it's getting better and better each time. So we go in it, just make sure you got to clean out that gullet as well. It's quite important to keep that channel clean. So go in again, just a little tiny bit more. You can just about see the end of the groove in there, and you can see how much is sticking out the other side. So that gives you an idea of roughly where you are in terms of reaming out the hole. I'll try it again, and there, it's getting really close now. And then again, once more, we'll probably do it. Just go a little bit deeper, just almost up to the end of the hone. And there you go, 100%, absolutely perfect. There's no movement in that guide whatsoever. There's absolutely no sideways movement, yet it's nice and free to turn. In fact, what I'll do is I'll do the old paintbrush trick. Here we are, I have a paintbrush. So now we can see how easy that is to turn with a paintbrush. Now the paintbrush is free to move, absolutely great. And there's absolutely no movement in that whatsoever. So there we are. So that's the fitment of the guide all complete, and also the first use of my honing tool a complete success. Okay, so that's very close now to a fully working chassis. You see all the back end is in. I glued the back tyres on with some Sally Hansen's hard as nails nail varnish. I've drilled and tapped the bosses to M2.5. I've also done up the gear there, got the correct backlash all set up and ready to go. The front wheels have been assembled and put onto the axle, and the front axle has all been riveted in place, and also the guide has been set up, and there's a 0.3 spacer in there to get the correct ride height when it's placed on the setup block. So if I put some power to the back wheels now, you should see it works. So there we are. So all we've got left now to do is to make the steering geometry up the front so that we've actually got steering when we turn the guide. So let's get on with that. Okay, ladies and gentlemen, I think we've successfully managed to turn a standard Tamiya 1/24 scale Lancia Turbo kit into a fully working slot car with brass steering. And just for fun, let's do the old paintbrush trick on it. I think we can all agree that that is perfectly adequate. And if we put it on the track, it runs. So, with the standard kit chassis successfully converted to a slot car chassis with working steering, that brings us nicely to the end of part 2. So in part 3, we'll take the body set, get it all painted up, fitted to the chassis, and get on the track and see what she looks like. So, if you've enjoyed this sort of content, maybe you'll subscribe. And if you could hit the little bell button, that would be awesome. So until the next time, thank you very much.